Welcome to Evolution Revolution. My name is Susan Allan, and I am thrilled to have you with us today. As you know, if you've watched the show before, the purpose of Evolution Revolution is to introduce you to tools and skills and experts who have discovered different modalities that allow us to transform our lives. And I mean experts with skills that really work. Because I know that, like me, you are committed to a life of peace and joy and health and success, right? And if you have any kind of issues that you think would benefit from learning the heart space system that I discovered, you know that I offer a free 1-hour telephone consultation that's private. So you can see if the way you think, the way you listen, the way you speak, the way you act or react could really benefit from new tools and skills and understanding. Now, today I am so thrilled because we have with us today William Peters, who is the founder of the Shared Crossing Project. And many of you have had near-death experiences. I don't know if any of you have already had a shared death experience with a loved one. So let me tell you about William. First of all, the Shared Crossing Project is a local organization created to raise awareness and educate people about the profound and healing experiences available to the dying and their loved ones. The Shared Crossing Project also teaches participants how to share in the early afterlife experience of their dying loved ones. And these shared death experiences are the focus of Dr. Raymond Moody's most recent book, Glimpses of Eternity. And incidentally, Dr. Moody is going to be in Santa Barbara very soon, thanks to William Peters. And you'll hear about that a little later in the show. William is a licensed marriage and family therapist at the Family Therapy Institute in Santa Barbara, and he specializes in end-of-life and afterlife phenomena. Now, as he prepares couples to share this experience together, really extraordinary things happen. Not only for the person who's dying, the patient, but also for the loved one or the caregiver. And I'm really excited to hear all about it. So first of all, tell us what this means, what the translation, the definition of shared death experience.
So as you said, the shared death experience was, the term was coined by Raymond Moody. And he really brought it to our attention in his recent book, Glimpses of Eternity, just about 4 or 5 years ago. And the experience itself is very similar to the near-death experience. The primary features are this sense of an out-of-body experience, seeing a shared life review, seeing the light, being visited by deceased relatives, and many other phenomena that are quite heart-opening and connecting for the surviving loved one. These types of experiences are recognized throughout time, certainly in indigenous cultures and in folklore, but we in the West have been a bit slower to accept it because it's so mysterious and difficult to explain. Most of our medical model really needs to have an understanding for something before it embraces it. But this research by Dr. Moody and the research we're doing is now bringing this more into center stage. And so we're in a very exciting time in regards to exploring the shared death experience.
Thank you. Now I know there are different components to the shared death experience, and one of them is translucent smoke.
Yes, this is a very common, I'd say one of the most common in the shared death experience. This is this phenomenon where the loved one or caregivers sees a mist or vapor that's in the form of the human body. It's a translucent replica of the person, and it rises out of the crown or the heart or sometimes out of the third eye. And it looks like a ghost, and I think just using a layperson's interpretation, it makes us wonder if this is where we actually got our sense of ghosts. because the descriptions are very similar to that.
You know, when you and I were speaking before, I told you that I had had a lot of near-death experiences and experiences after friends had died. And those of you who've watched the show and also watched me on Compassionate Connection, you know that I had one of those experiences with my beloved dog, Max. But now, listening to William speak about vapor, I know that it was actually a shared death experience, which I didn't realize. So I've had one. And maybe you have too. Maybe if you think back, you have too. So tell us about the angelic music, the beautiful music that's often part of this.
Yes. Many experiencers talk about this divine, sublime, as you said, angelic music. And what's striking about it is its beauty. It seems to capture the heart and soul of the experiencer. And musicians who have had the shared death experience describe it as well beyond anything possible in the human earth realm. Its complexity, its depth, its harmony is spellbinding. So this is quite a powerful experience, and one that people come back from really remembering and speaking of.
Thank you. And also there's a luminescence or a brilliance or something very different about the light that happens.
So the light, you mentioned the near-death experience. Well, the light is, this luminous light is really the dominant feature in the near-death experience. And it's prominent also in the shared death experience. Less common, but when it appears and the experiencer has this, it leaves a similar impact in that the light evokes a sense of love, of peace, of wisdom, of purity. And it's very heart-opening. What we have found in the research is that people will tend to project onto the light their own spiritual or religious tradition. So we might say it was God, it was Vishnu. But all the same, that speaks to the power of this light and the influence that it has over the experiencer.
So then what you're saying is the NDE, the near-death experience of light, and the shared death experience of light may be very similar for the person who's not dying.
It is very similar.
Wow. Okay.
But there are some differences. With the shared death experience, what people will describe is that they're sitting in the room and the light will actually come into the room. And the shape and experience of the room will be changed by the light. Okay. To use some language that we talk about as we study this as researchers, is that we feel like there's a way in which we're going into a different dimension in which the light and the time-space dimension of which light is a part of shifts dramatically. And I think that's why we experience the light so profoundly.
Yes. Okay. Now I think I have more of an understanding. And I know that there's a pull upward that the person who's perfectly healthy sitting in the chair could experience while their loved one is about to die.
Yes. This is what we call the upward gravitational pull on the experiencer. And this is generally well received by the experiencer. Sometimes, though, they feel, and I have had people report this to me, that they felt uncomfortable with this at first and like they were going to die. And they didn't want to, so they resisted it. And some have resisted it and have blocked their experience. This is one of the reasons we do the education, because we want people to know if you do feel this, trust it, go with it. But those who do go with it, which are those that are featured in our literature, this leads them into a more fuller experience of the shared death experience, where you get more of the components or elements that we're talking about right now.
Thank you. And I think the thing that's most interesting to me is the concept of a shared life review, which is part of the shared death experience.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Yes. Okay. So we call this the co-experienced life review, and so the life review is very common in the near-death experience. It's where you see every detail of your life in intricate detail, and you see the karmic implications of it, and you feel it. You feel how your actions of others really impact you emotionally, and your whole community and family. In the shared death experience, you can imagine this in this way. Your deceased loved one is now on the other side. You are with them, and you are observing their life review. This is why we call it a shared life review. And what experiencers report is that this life review reveals aspects of their loved one that they never knew. And so, like for example, I'm just thinking now, a couple weeks ago I had a client come in, and she did not want to participate in the death of her mother, because her mother had been, quite frankly, very critical of her and not kind. But we got her to a point where she was comfortable to be with her mother at the time of death, and she participated in this life review. What she saw was that her mother was verbally abused by her father, by her mother's father. And she knew in that moment, she was weeping as she said this, I realized my mother wasn't doing this on purpose to me. It was just what she knew. It was just, she just didn't know how she was hurting me. So she really had a sense of empathy and forgiveness for her mother right then. And we think that's one of the purposes for the shared life review, is it really gives the surviving loved one, the experiencer, an empathy and clears karma, if you will, between the two of them.
Thank you. That's so interesting. And I know that another part is encountering the heavenly realms. I mean, what would anyone want more than that? So can you explain that to us, describe it?
Yes. The heavenly realms are, just as you described, celestial, mind-blowing is what we often hear. People say, it was just mind-blowing to see the galaxy in that depth and that, awesome state. And what people also describe in these heavenly realms is they can see into the depth or the energy systems of what's around them. So not only will they see, if they do see beings, they will see them multidimensionally. So they'll see their, if you will, these terms don't really work, but to see their light force energy in them vibrating and illuminated. These are very profound experiences for people when they come back to the human realm. So yes, common.
Howard Wills, who you and I both know, and the audience knows as well, he has said that when he sees us, he sees the light body with like blips of light inside of it in different ways, which is quite fascinating.
Yeah.
Fascinating to me. Now, there are shared out-of-body experiences. Tell me more about that.
So the shared out-of-body experience, once again, the near-death experience has the out-of-body experience commonly in it. And people have out-of-body experiences without going near-death, as you probably know. I know your viewers know that. I've had a variety, I should say. I've had a variety of out-of-body experiences. I've had 2 near-death experiences. Each of those I had an out-of-body experience in. One was in a skiing accident, and it was a high-speed skiing accident. At the moment of impact, I was catapulted out of my body, sailed through the universe, saw the light, had a life review, all of that. And I had another near-death experience where I just had a blood disorder and I was floating above my body for a long period of time in the ICU. What makes the shared death experience, out-of-body experience, unique is it's a co-experienced out-of-body experience. So I had one of these when I was a hospice worker in San Francisco at the Zen Hospice Project. And I was just reading a story to a man near the end of his life, and all of a sudden, I was above my body, suspended. And imagine this, I'm suspended in my spirit state with the person I'm working with right next to me. He literally looked at me with a kind of a chagrin on his face, almost to say, check this out. And I was just captivated. But I have to tell you, a few moments later, I don't even know how much time passed, I was back in my body and I never stopped reading. So this is a very interesting, profound experience. So that is what we call the co-experienced out-of-body. Co-experienced out-of-body experience, yes.
And the fact that time appears to stop is a component of that.
Well, we don't know really what happens to time. That's all these experiences, we don't know what to do with the time dimension. There's a good possibility that, I think this is what we're learning about in consciousness studies and quantum physics and other more advanced physics, is that the time-space continuum is radically different and may not even exist outside the human realm. And I have to say that's outside my scope of expertise, but that's my understanding.
And anyone who's been in a car accident, you talked about it, and I've had it. Time, clearly stops inside of your body, inside of your brain, inside of your mind, though it doesn't for everybody else. They see the car moving, at whatever crazy speed, but to you inside, it's everything has just slowed down like a taffy pull, right?
Yes.
Okay. So now there is being greeted by beings of light. And, I will never forget Audrey Hepburn playing one of those beings of light in some movie. I can't remember which the movie. But as I saw the movie and there's Audrey Hepburn on the other side waiting to greet you, I thought, that's perfect for me, sign me up. So tell us about that part of it.
Yeah, being greeted by beings of light or deceased, who are often deceased loved ones or friends of the person who's dying. This is an experience that really helps the loved ones, the surviving loved ones, because they have a sense that their dying loved ones are being cared for and being guided into the afterlife. There was this is a local piece. Rod Latham had a shared death experience with his mother, and he's a local playwright here in Santa Barbara, and he put it into theater and produced it. It was called Unfinished Business, and in this play, he really dramatizes quite well the visitation of his mother's friends and relatives. In this case, Rod's grandmother was a central player in this. But the message is very clear that these loved ones who are deceased in the spirit side are coming to guide and help with the transition from the human realm back into the spirit realm. And like I said, the peace and comfort that the remaining loved ones have when they see this and experience this is quite comforting.
Thank you. And you've told me that there's something you called a boundary of the heavenly realms. I didn't understand that. Please tell me more about that.
So in the heavenly realms, there often experiencers will share with us that they come to a point beyond which they cannot go, and there is oftentimes their loved one will turn to them and give them some sort of communication that this is as far as you can go and I am going on into the afterlife. Sometimes it's a physical barrier, a wall, a river, sometimes just a large field. I'm just remembering a client who shared this some time ago. His father had died, and he was with him in the shared death experience, and they came upon a bridge, and his father walked over the bridge, told him that that was as far as he could go. His son stood there and realized his father was going on and he wasn't. He looked down into the river and he saw trout jumping. And as my client was sharing this, he started to weep. He said, I knew at that point my father was in heaven because he was a lifelong trout fisherman. And there is a real personal nature to these, to these experiences. And I mean, there is if you look at the research that comes from past life regression and regression between lives, there is, Michael Newton is most noted for this, saying that there's a sense that these experiences could be choreographed by guides to comfort us as loved ones. And that certainly makes sense to me because they seem very personal and very heartfelt, and they know things about us they could not know if it was just a random series of events.
And you know that I've had about 7 or 8 people after they died come to me in my dreams. And every one of the messages is completely different. Every one is specific to the person who died. So is there a name for that, by the way? I forgot to ask you.
The name for...
Long after somebody dies, usually it's about a week.
Yeah, well, that can be called ADC, after death communication. And there's a great field of growing body of research on that. Bill Guggenheim he did extensive research, and he wrote a book called Hello from Heaven. It's for common mainstream consumption. And it's very well written and well documented, and he's quite serious about his research. And we find that these experiences of communication from the afterlife are far more common than we know, and that a lot of people don't share them because they feel that they'll be, looked at askance or as, crazy or something like that. But I think I know that our culture is in the midst of a major shift in this department, because people are talking more about this. I think the recent book by Eben Alexander, Proof of Heaven, it's sold over 3 million copies, been on the New York Times bestseller list for now 60 or 70 weeks. People are opening up to this and are having more conversations about, what's the afterlife, what's the spirit realm, and this engagement will be healthy for all of us.
And I'm just grateful I live in California now, because I can tell you, I was telling my friend William that when I spoke to my family, who are all in New York or Connecticut and all Harvard graduates, about the different after-death communication I'd received from my cousin who just died very, very recently, and my uncle who died a year and a half ago. They obviously hadn't read any of those books. So you want to be really cognizant. To me, I have nothing to lose. I have nothing to lose. You know me, I'll tell anybody anything if I think it will, benefit you in some way. But be careful, be aware of your audience, consider your audience's needs, and then be prepared to do whatever you decide to do and hear whether it met their needs or it didn't meet their needs, right? So my question is, how common is shared death experience, not among your clients who obviously you're training them to be able to have it, but in the general population, would you say?
This is a great mystery. Raymond Moody started talking about the shared death experience in the 80s and 90s, long before he started doing research and collating case studies on the shared death experience. He would bring it up when he was talking to his audiences, primarily about the near-death experience, and he would just ask. He would describe the shared death experience and say, how many of you have had this or known somebody who's had this? And what he found was about 5 to 10% of the audience members would raise their hand affirmatively. Now, of course, he's dealing with a select audience, so that's obviously not a reliable indication, but it is a data point. I will say that we had an event last year. We actually basically purchased an entire show of Rod Latham's Unfinished Business, because it did, as I said before or earlier, it did depict the shared death experience. So we use it as a way to gather our community together. And when I asked this question to our community, we had 40, as much as 50% of the people raise their hands. And that tells you something, that if you have 60, 70 people who have had this experience, it's happening more than we know. But like so many of these experiences, in particular, I think the best data point is the near-death experience. I had my near-death experience, and I didn't talk about it for 10 years until I heard other people talking about it. So there's a way in which in our culture, we don't have a way to talk about these experiences. We don't have a lexicon that we can hang this experience on. So it largely sits in our unconscious for a long period of time. Our hope in the Shared Crossing project is to bring awareness about these experiences so that people can talk about them, and we can bring this awareness more generally across the culture.
Thank you. I was very surprised when I went to Eben Alexander's talk, and I know you were there as well. I was very surprised that when he asked how many people had near-death experiences, and of course I raised my hand, that very, very few people raised their hands. Yeah. Now, we don't know if they had one and they were shy or whatever. But I was surprised because Santa Barbara is a very enlightened audience. Yeah. Thank goodness those of us who are based here, most of us are long-term meditators. Many of us have, practiced many of the esoteric different studies for a long time, and you guys know my resume. It's pretty much endless in that area. And so we've had these experiences because the first step is to be interested, willing, and open to having the experience, like with anything. Now, tell us about one of your shared death experiences so that we can really get a brief picture of it.
Yeah. So where I got most familiar with the shared death experience was when I was a volunteer hospice worker with the Zen Hospice Project in San Francisco. And we worked at a county hospital. There were, I believe, 24 beds, and it was an old style hospital in the sense that it was all open beds. There were just drapes separating the patients. And my only job, responsibility, if you will, was to be a comfort and support to these persons who were dying. And many of them were indigent. They often didn't have family, at least family that were attending to them, all day long. So I and my colleagues there had a great opportunity to be at the bedside for many deaths. And so initially what I found was I experienced what we call the more entry level elements of the shared death experience. The change of the geometry of the room, which is all of a sudden it feels like the corners or sharper edges in a room get softer and rounder. And the music comes in a little. You start to hear the music, the heavenly music come in. Then you might hear what we call like a hush or a shh come in. And that, to me, always seems like a change in the energy, change in the vibration, if you will. And certainly saw the perispirit or the soul spirit leaving the body, the translucent replica that we talked about earlier, leaving a number of times. And I did not have the experience of deceased relatives or angels coming through, but I often felt the presence of beings. Like there was a thickness as you got closer to death. Very similar, actually, to birth. I think it's really important to bring that up because there is so many similarities between birth and death. And it's almost as if our families, our community of spirits and angels come at those times to support us. And I found myself at deaths and at the birth of my child looking up frequently because I just felt like there was activity above me. And so it's that presence, if you will. These are all the elements that constitute the shared death experience as well. It's important to note that the shared death experience is so nascent that we are, as we speak, developing more criterion and fleshing it out as we hear more people's experiences.
Thank you. That was just such a beautiful description. I so appreciate that. It's just so moving. Now, when you have a couple and they are together for the shared death experience, and one of them is in the process of dying, what is the gift for the partner who stays alive?
Yes. I'm going to give you an example of somebody because I think this is, and this is recent as well. I was working with a woman who she had been in a 30-year partnership with her husband, and he was dying slowly, and it was a painful death. Actually, it was an aggressive cancer, and so when he died, she had the shared death experience, and a number of features which are less important than the real impact, which is your question, is she. First, it's important to notice that she had a mix of feelings. She was sad to see him go, but she was relieved that he was out of suffering. But because of the shared death experience, she had a sense that he was alive and well in the afterlife. She just knew it. And it's different than just to have that belief. She knew he was alive and well. Now, he'd come to her both in the shared death experience and a couple times afterwards. Also, what she expressed was she had an absence of any fear about her own death. She was absolutely convinced there was an afterlife, and she was convinced that she was going to see her husband again, and that gave her a great deal of solace. The other piece that's really important, a benefit, is that her grief, while she grieved his loss, her grief was tempered a great deal. It was softened because she knew he was in a better place, and she knew she was going to see him again. So this was more like a vacation away from him, not one that she would choose, but one that she was willingly accepting. And the other benefit from her was, and this happens in these experiences, with her remaining time, she realized she had work to do here. She had a purpose to fulfill here, and she was getting about it. We see that urgency when people have the shared death experience. They see the purpose in a human life, and they get about that work. These are all profound benefits to people.
You know, I had totally forgotten until 2 minutes ago that the very first time I had an after-death communication, I was 19 years old. My father was very near death, and he was in the hospital, and I was at a field trip for school. And as I came out of the museum, I suddenly said to my friend, I just need to use the phone. And it was the eras of the public phones. And I actually called my father's hospital room, and my father couldn't come to the phone, they told me. And I speak to my mother. Your mother can't come to the phone. Very strange. Well, my father had died seconds before. And so he had just died, and they had asked my mother to leave the room. That's how fast I actually got to the phone. And I didn't until today, so that's 30, 40 years ago. I hadn't until just this moment realized that was not just a coincidence. Of course it wasn't,
Well, if I may, that is what we would call a deathbed coincidence. And there is a great deal of research coming out of Great Britain by Peter Fenwick and his wife Elizabeth Fenwick. He's a neuropsychiatrist, and he has done an extensive study. He did it for 5 years, from I want to say 2003 to 2008 or so. And this deathbed coincidence that you're talking about happens at the moment of death, and loved ones from remotely located have a sense of knowing that this person has transitioned. And there are various phenomena that the deathbed coincidence experiencer receives. Yours is a perfect one, but also there's flashes of light. There's just a sense of knowing. There's certainly electrical impulses too, that we see clocks stop and TVs blow out and computers do funny things. All because this is, this frequency piece is very much a part of the death experience. There's a change in frequency and the dying, and it impacts those of us who are surviving. And it seems to be connected through, I want to say, quite frankly, it's connected through our love connections, through family and loved ones. And so we feel it and sense it, just as you have, Susan.
Wow, thank you so much. Now, you said that sometimes the surviving partner changes his or her life. That they really understand. You talk to me anytime, you'll hear me talk about legacy and getting even more serious, and I'm already, very serious, and I'm completely committed to making sure that all the tools and skills that I've discovered live long after I do, so that people have the benefits of creating more peace. So now, what kind of difference have you seen? What kind of shift?
Well, people who do have the shared death experience tend to come back and, as I said earlier, get about the business of pursuing their life's work or their mission or whatever their greater purpose is. We see changes in career, we see changes in relationships. Some of this is painful, but you have to trust that this is for the higher good if someone is following their heart or their deeper calling. I have a good example of this. I worked with a woman who was dying of ovarian cancer, and I was working with her on the protocols, but just her alone. I should say the shared death experience facilitation protocols are what we teach at the Shared Crossing Project, and these protocols we usually teach in pairs, but she said to us that her kids and loved ones were not spiritual as she was and had no interest in this. Well, so I taught her these protocols. 2 weeks later, her daughter calls and says, listen, I need to share with you an experience. You were working with my mother on something spiritual, and I want to tell you what happened to me the night she died. She said, I was down the hall. I felt a pull on my body. I got scared. I felt like I was going to die. I didn't want to die, so I resisted. But then I looked out, and I saw like a being out there with blonde hair, and I thought, oh my God, it's one of my children. So I went out there, and when I got close to this being, she turned around. It was my mother, and she looked at me and she said, you see, darling, I'm fine. I love you. I will be with you always. Go back and care for your kids. I'll see you later. So her daughter called me, like I said, 2 weeks later, and I've stayed in touch with her, and she has completely changed her professional career. She is now pursuing her ability, which she now says, I always knew I had. My mom always encouraged me to pursue it, but now I'm doing it. She has gifts as a psychic and a medium, and she's pursuing those, and she's doing quite well with them. And she feels like her life has a great deal more meaning, and she's in contact with her mother now, and she's like this gift that she's developed, her psychic ability, is keeping her in touch with her mother. So there's a number of benefits from this, but there's a very profound change. And we see this quite commonly. People come back and really, like I said so many times, they get a sense for what the purpose of a human life is. In a sense, it's a school, it's a place to have these experiences, to elevate the soul, if you will, and they get about that business.
Thank you. And I know when my dear friend Rama Seltzer died some years ago, she had such an extraordinary dying process that people were bringing their children and their grandchildren to her bed. And it was really quite extraordinary. Rama, somebody I met through Siddha Yoga, so she's a long time meditator, about 30 years. I also accompanied her to the Oneness University, so she was a Diksha giver. So this is a woman who had spent her entire life in a deep and spiritual place. And for the last number of years of her life, and she was mid-80s when she died, she would be talking to you, and then she'd close her eyes and she'd go into the Shakti, into the life force. And then she'd, open her eyes again. And she was just someone who just loved that life force. So at the end of her life, she was in joy, she was at peace, she was in bliss, she was present, she wasn't medicated. But she's like the only person I've heard of who's not a famous enlightened master who's been able to master this. So when you teach people the shared death experience, I would imagine the first thing is you've got to teach them how not to be completely panic-stricken, terrified, and when people in the old days gave birth, they would say, wake me when the hairdresser comes, They don't want to know any part of it, just give them all the meds. But in this case, there's no waking them because they're on the way out. How do you deal with that?
Well, our program is designed to it has 3 parts to it. The first part is really to address what you're bringing up, which is this inherent anxiety, cultural anxiety we have, or resistance to death. And sadly, because of our resistance to death, we are missing out on so many of the profound and healing experiences that are available at the end of life. So we begin by educating our group members, if you will, with these profound experiences that are available, things like pre-death premonitions. We teach them near-death awareness. What are the things you'll see towards the end of life? Things like deathbed visions. This is the visitation by angels or loved ones who visit as many as a week or 2 before, but mostly in the hours and days before. These are the angels coming to facilitate this transition. And of course, we also talk about the shared death experience as well in that training. So we get the education up. Once we've got them ready with their anxieties down, then we prepare them for the best death possible. And that's a term used by Ira Byock to talk about how is it that you can make the best of a situation that can be difficult. And so we teach them, we reconcile their unfinished business. We do gratitude practices. We affirm their life's meaning. We do the basic things like facilitate communication with their loved ones so they can say, I love you and goodbye. These are the pieces that prepare for the good death. And then the third piece we teach them in this program is we teach them the linking protocols, which are those methods that allow the dying and the loved one to stay connected or reconnect so that they can experience the initial stages of the afterlife together.
Thank you. I mean, it's so interesting because it's almost like you're listening to him talking about SAT prep classes or, bar exam prep classes or, being an Olympic participant, being an Olympic athlete classes, coaching and training. Because the truth is, if somebody supports you in building these neural pathways and the muscle memory again and again and again, then even in the face of, the bar exam or whatever, you're going to have the ability to remember and do these things. It's just so fascinating because that's how humans learn.
Exactly. And if I can do a follow-up on that, you were mentioning the birthing. I want to talk about the birthing movement because I think what's really important about what's happening in our culture right now about death and dying is that the baby boomers are now essentially burying their parents and their loved ones.
And themselves.
And themselves, of course.
Right.
But keep in mind, it was the baby boomers that brought consciousness to the birth movement.
We brought consciousness to everything. We brought you the sex revolution. We brought you the drug revolution. We brought you the consciousness movements and everything. We ended the war in Vietnam. I am telling you, we're old now, but you have no idea. We worked so hard, I'm telling you.
Yes,
so thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you for the recognition.
And I think the crowning legacy of the baby boomers will be that they will, and I'm a baby boomer too, I'm in the last year or two of that, we will revolutionize the way we die in this culture. That will be our parting legacy, and the movement is afoot now. This will be a grassroots change. This will be everyday people like us saying, wow, that death that I saw or read about or my friend shared with me or my own death of my parent, I don't want to do it that way anymore. And we're going to talk about it with our friends and we're going to do this differently. And that's where the Shared Crossing Project is a resource to those people. And we offer groups to help people in this. And so we feel like the timing for what we're doing, look, we wouldn't be doing it if we didn't have so much interest, and we have a tremendous amount of interest in our groups, and we're just grateful that we're doing this together.
I'm just really thrilled. I was just so thrilled to meet you and so thrilled to share you with our audience. And the thing that's really exciting to me also is that William told me that UCSB is doing a research project on that. So, tell us about this is a wonderful, wonderful thing because now it gets real recognition from a university.
Yes, it is important for the shared death experience and certainly the protocols we've developed to facilitate it to have a rigorous research study validate what we're doing. That is the way that our traditional medical community and the end-of-life care facilities will, know that what we're doing is of value and merit and offer some healing value to their clients and patients. So as it turns out, I think this is synchronistic. At UCSB, there is a team of researchers in the Department of Religious Studies led by Michael Kinsella. He's in the Religious Studies Department. And they received a grant from the Immortality Project to study the near-death experience movement and the afterlife movement, of which we are clearly a part of. And so he is studying our shared death experience facilitation protocols, groups, and he's looking at both whether we improve the quality of the death experience for the loved ones and the dying, and seeing the efficacy of our protocols to facilitate the shared death experience. They are also studying another group we're doing, which is actually our most popular group, which is the Life Beyond Death group, which is a group that explores what happens at the end of life and looks at the research and gives people an opportunity to engage with each other. It's an 8-week group, and Michael, the lead researcher, has been in our groups as a participant researcher for the last 4 groups we've done. There are about 15 people in the group, and we cover near-death experiences, shared-death experiences, pre-death visions, past life regressions, space between lives, mediumship. We cover the full gamut, and we do it both from a research perspective, what do we know about the research, also from personal experience, and we bring in the wisdom from great spiritual traditions. So it's really a comprehensive experience for group members, and I just came from that group before coming here today to this interview, and it really, the people get so passionate about this. So I'm just so blessed that the people here in Santa Barbara are participating in this, and they really are. We have not done a group without a wait list, and I've done this group 8 times in the last 2 years, so it is very popular.
Thank you. I have to hear more about it, so please send me information when you get back to the office. Now, forgiveness and gratitude, which I know that forgiveness and gratitude are essential components of not only healing from any health issues, but in staying healthy, and I know that from our dear friend Howard Wills. So you've said that forgiveness and gratitude are really important in the shared death experience. I was surprised, so explain that to us, if you would.
Yes, we still don't understand how the shared death experience happens. Now, Raymond Moody asserts that the experiencer, the caregiver, loved one, if that caregiver or loved one has a perspective or a way of being that is one of openness or surrender or acceptance to death, the death of their loved one, then he has found that they are more, these are the people that tend to report to us that they had the shared death experience. So he's hypothesizing that that creates a receptivity, this acceptance of death, if you will. And certainly, I have found that when I work with people, that one of the ways to get to this place of acceptance and surrender to death, a healthy surrender, I should say, is that you need to work through unfinished business so that these people are, the loved ones and the dying, are ready to let each other go. And so this work is what we focus on. And you asked the question of forgiveness and gratitude. Well, forgiveness is a central piece in reconciling unfinished business. So we focus a great deal on that. And the way that we do that, I have a Buddhist practitioner for probably 2 decades now. And I use the traditional Buddhist forgiveness practices that I was taught, the 3 directions, which is forgiveness for others. Focus on that. And the second piece is forgiveness for self. And then forgiveness to others who have harmed us. So I'm not sure I said that right. I think really what I meant to say is forgiveness to those who have harmed us, forgiveness to ourselves for the harm we've caused ourselves, and forgiveness to ourselves for us having harmed others. So it's those 3 directions, which is basically the only place you can create harm. So we infuse those into the practice.
Thank you. And if you're familiar with Howard's prayers, that terminology is very familiar to you, as certainly it is to me, because I've memorized a lot of his prayers. Now, as you were speaking, it was interesting. The 2 people closest to me who died within the last year, near the end of their lives, in the last year of lives, they did something or multiple things to me that I didn't appreciate, didn't enjoy, and I let it go. You guys know me. Let it go. What's the point? I'm certainly forgiving. But as I found out that they had died, I said, you know what? Go give somebody else your message and dreams. Leave me out of it, because I really don't want to have to call your family, and then they're going to give me a hard time. And deliver the message to somebody else, because after you did that thing to me, I don't need it. And I didn't get a single message from either of them until, because you know me, and I practice forgiveness all the time, and I said, oh, please, if you don't have anyone else to give the message to give, come to me in my dreams and I'll report it. Boom! That's how quickly, the dreams came. So I can tell you, it really does make a huge difference. Now, saying goodbye. Mm-hmm. Well, saying goodbye is a concept. If we believe that somebody's living forever, and if we believe that we're living forever, and if we believe that we're going to see them after they die and we're going to see them after we die, then actually the story about saying goodbye disappears. But what do you teach about it?
So saying goodbye, it's a very important step. And the reason why it's an important step is it's a shared acknowledgement that this chapter in your life is coming together, and a chapter in your spiritual journey together is coming to a close. And what I appreciate, and the people we work with have expressed, is once this acknowledgement is held between the dying and the loved one, it opens up a whole nother space. It's like another chapter that they never imagined could emerge. It's this final chapter where there's no hiding that this person's dying. The fight to prolong death is ceased. There's a shared appreciation for the time that they have left together. And that is an extremely rich time. I have an example that I want to share on that, just because this is quite moving. A woman with 3 children, she was in her 50s, and her children were in their 20s. And her children were, really encouraging her to fight to stay alive. You can understand why. And the mother did as much as she could, but she was really in a great deal of pain. She had very aggressive cancer. And we really helped her, the mother, to bring her children together and say to them, listen, I love you. I'm just feeling like I can't do this anymore. The pain is mounting. I've already outlived my prognosis by a year or two. And the way that she did this was so loving to her children, that her children, they were deeply saddened, but it started a process where they could sit in a room together and weep together, celebrate their life together. And then for the next 3 weeks, they had another chapter, which was one they just couldn't anticipate, which was like, we got to experience each other in ways we never knew possible. We shared things we never shared. We talked about parts of our life that we had kept secret and that we were ashamed of. We connected. And when my mom died, I'm speaking for one of the daughters, when my mom died, I looked at her and I said, I love you, and I have just so much gratitude, and I want you to go because I now know that's best for you and for everyone in our family. Now that's work that takes effort and intention, but the rewards for that work are just, it's why I do what I do, because when I can, so many people don't even know that exists. That's a foreign land, a place beyond goodbye for this life. So goodbye is really huge to me, and it's a central part of our training.
And thank you, because that's very different from what, frankly, I expected you to talk about when you talked about goodbye. It's about the deepest level of human intimacy that's possible. And it's so fantastic that in those last days, weeks, or months, when you would think that people don't have that ability anymore, that they now do. And I've been studying the Bardos, which is the Tibetan Book of the Dead and the Tibetan dying process and post-death process. And so it's so fascinating. Of course, all the great masters say all the same things. There we are. So now the last thing we're going to talk about, we have just a few minutes, is staying connected.
Yes.
Now, and what I know is some people have a lot of trouble letting go and dying. So when you talk about staying connected, please include that, okay?
Yes. So it is our hypothesis that once you've done these preparatory exercises, essentially clearing your unfinished business, and the loved one and the dying are accepting that the death is coming, that this is the time when we can teach these, what we call linking protocols. So the linking protocols allow the dying and the loved one to stay connected together into the afterlife. Now, I don't have time, quite frankly, to go into them because these methods are a little bit complex. But what I say about this is that for those of us who have had near-death experiences, shared-death experiences, or mediums who travel this pathway from this consciousness in the human body to the spirit realm, there is a train, if you will. It's not a physical train, it's a spiritual train. And there's signposts on it. And so what we try and do is tag these signposts so that the dying will, when they come upon this signpost in their transition, they will remember to call their loved ones to come with them right there, wherever they are in this journey. And this may explain why people who experience the shared death experience have different phenomena, different experiences. They're not, in any way, there's a constitution of them that are similar, but none of them are the same. They're all unique. And we're working with this hypothesis, as I say, that maybe they're being called into different parts of this transition. And so what we try and do as we learn more about this transition is to teach the dying we kind of choreograph it for them. In other words, we say, you may run into this. And this is very much what the Bardo Todo does in the Tibetan book of the Living and Dying. They get these signposts and they teach the dying that this is what they're going to see, and then help them work with that.
Thanks. And we just have about half a minute for you to talk about Raymond Moody, who's coming on March 18th and March 19th to Santa Barbara.
So this is a real big event for all of Santa Barbara, and certainly the Shared Crossing Project, because Raymond Moody is the foremost researcher and really the lead voice in the shared death experience movement. He has been a really wonderful advocate for our work. He's coming primarily to support the research. What you'll hear if you come and hear Raymond is that he will tell amazing stories, amazing shared death experience stories. And we just thank you to come on March 18th and 19th. There's a series of events. You can come to our website at sharedcrossing.com to learn more. And we appreciate your support.
Thank you. I will certainly be there. And I cannot thank you enough for coming. It was just thrilling. I'm looking forward to having you come again. So I think May is when we have our next opening. So start thinking about all the things that you didn't have time to tell us today, and make notes because you'll need them. It's just great. And for those of you who are my age, older, or those of you who have health issues and death is something that you think about. I know with the way that I suffered before I met Howard Wills, I thought about death really all the time. And so this is the most extraordinary gift. And I really am excited to hear from each and every one of you what your questions are, what you enjoyed, etc. So we have Howard Wills coming on February 26th. You know I'm ecstatic, and I can't wait. I really can't wait. Those of you who haven't seen him before, please do watch. I'm still open to one more guest who wants to be healed right there on the show. And after this program ends, we're filming a testimonial, so this stuff works. Thank you. Thank you so much.